Welcome back to the Mackem in the Middle podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at all the signings Sunderland have made so far, some of the signings that could potentially be coming in between now and what I think is Tuesday is the deadline, of course, 31st of January, just 2 days away now. And of course, another talking point, a big talking point, arose after the game against Fulham, Ross Stewart's injury. And, we talked a little bit about it in the podcast reacting to the Fulham game, that I don't think the scans have been completed yet, but the general idea is that Ross Stewart probably won't play again this season and might be lucky to play again this year. So, of course, the striker situation is going to be another one that we focus on talking about today. But like I say, first and foremost, Michael, looking at some of the signings that we have made so far before we get on to some of the ones that could come in and look imminent to be coming in, you've got the likes of, obviously, Pierre-Emerick from West Ham. If he's half as good as what Adji Elise was when he joined, he will look and be a very good, valuable player. And obviously, he made his debut against Fulham and didn't look too out of place. And what I think, could be wrong on this, but I think that's his first ever senior appearance as well. Obviously, Isaac Lahaji as well from Lille, a player that has played quite a few times in the French top division. I think he fell out with, the club president, I think it was, the news at the time. And obviously, he's made the move. And then the most recent signing at the time of recording, obviously, Joe Gelhardt. 3 positive and quite exciting signings.
Yeah, they kind of symbolise what our recruitment team's been going for, haven't they? I mean, everyone knows my thoughts on Speakman and the regime, and my thoughts still stand by on a lot of that. But yeah, I mean, we've said we needed another. I've said I wanted a physical midfielder, and I think Ekwa seems to get the profile of that. He seems to, at least from what I've seen on social media, which again is not the best barometer, but make of that what you want to. He seems to have that physicality, a bit of bite about him. And you're right, didn't look out of place against Fulham, against a Premier League side. I know they had a few players that they didn't play, but they're still not got some bad players in there. Isaac Lahaji, I don't know how. I'm sure James will have to find out how that's pronounced because I don't know.
I'm the wrong person to ask.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll just give you the task. You or Phil Smith or
just call him Isaac.
Can ask.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. No, Lahaji, I think is someone obviously apparently someone again who has got quite a bit of talent. Correct if I'm wrong. I think he was touted to be one of the next big things, but then did he? Am I making this wrong? Did he break his leg, or am I making that up?
But I think what was happening at the time was, this is probably slightly wrong because I'm not entirely sure, but I think he was due to sign for Barcelona.
Yeah, that was when he was 15 years old. He broke his shin, I think.
Yeah. Obviously, if you're going to Barcelona at that young age and you look at some of the players they've brought through, you must have something about you.
Yeah, you'd like to think so. And that was so. If he was on the radar Barcelona at 15, then clearly he must have a decent level about him as a player. So it's one of those that fits into what we're trying to do. If you look at 2 examples, Patrick Roberts and Jack Clark as an example, or even Alex Pritchard, where players who are touted for really bigger things than when the level which we picked them up, and then they've lost their way a bit. So this and Lahaji's probably seen that this is a great platform now for younger players to come through and to thrive, and in some senses resurrect their careers. So that in itself, I think, I don't know much about him obviously because I've never watched him play, but it wouldn't surprise me if this is I don't know. I'd be interested to see particularly what James thinks on this, because as soon as he talks, as he has talks with the club, that this could be viewed for me as a long-term Amad Diallo replacement if he's any good. Because unless we get promoted to the Premier League, for me there is next to no chance Amad Diallo is going to be here next season, because Man United will want to get him out of the Premier League, and that's fair enough. I don't think there's any complaints from anyone on that. But I think if he gets a good understanding, gets a few months to settle in, bed in, then he might be ready for next season. So that could be a more long-term signing, but maybe I'm looking at that the wrong way. And then the last one, Joe Gelhardt. Safe to say, James, you might know a bit more about this. How many championship clubs did we beat to the signature of Gelhardt? Reportedly,
there was Wigan, Swansea, Sunderland. Who else was there? Did I hear?
Blackburn.
Blackburn, that was it. I knew it was a B. Blackburn and Middlesbrough, so quite a few. Bearing in mind, Wigan's his hometown club as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was. I've been told off a couple of Wigan fans, some of the sensible Wigan fans, I'm going to say, I've put a little dig in there. But the couple of the ones I spoke to that want to have a conversation with me, they were saying apparently they heard that he really wanted to go to Wigan, but Leeds wanted him to go somewhere better for his development. And look, he's here now. But the fact of the matter is, we've still beat the championship clubs to a signature. If you look at the clubs James mentioned, Swansea, who did the double over us, Middlesbrough, 3rd in the table, Blackburn in the playoffs. So I think it says a lot that we've beaten everyone to that sort of signing. And he's another one. If he's as good as what I've been told he is, then I'll put it this way: I got told by Wigan fan. I'm not going to mention them, but I'll call them out. And they said this with Gelhardt and Stewart. Granted, so I don't know whether this changes with Stewart injury, but he said he fancies us to go up with Gelhardt being there. He said he thinks he'd be one of our best players, and obviously he's played in the Premier League a few times, hasn't he? Over the last 18 months for Leeds. He got his stoppage time winner for against Norwich last season. So for me, if that's a big signing, then that's a real good masterstroke from the recruitment team to get him in. But yeah, overall, happy with what we've done so far, but we really do need to step it up in the next couple of days. Or the later on in the window, depending when this is going up.
Yeah. And just before we get on to some of the players that might be coming in and potentially going out as well, James, I think you tweeted out it was a year ago that we lost 6-0 at Bolton. Probably Sunderland's most important result in the last 5 years.
Stop it, you're giving me PTSD.
And it was only a few days ago I tweeted out about similar signings that we'd made in the past year, the likes of, I think it was Tommy Smith, Callum McFadzean, Danny Graham, etc. And it's not just on the pitch, but off the pitch, how far Sunderland have come. The likes of Joe Gelhardt coming in, who I think is the first signing Sunderland have possibly ever made that Newcastle fans have actually praised.
Yeah, it's ridiculous how far Sunderland have come in a year. But if you actually look at the squad that day, it's actually quite good. You got Hoffman in goal. Obviously, he was replaced by Patterson. Winchester right back. He's now gone out on loan. But Danny Bath's there. He scored an own goal. I think it was his second appearance for Sunderland. Callum Doyle, who's currently playing in the Championship with Coventry City and doing well by all accounts. Dennis Sergan, who's contributed for Sunderland this season. Dan Neil, who's having a brilliant campaign. Corey Evans, who's unfortunately picked up that injury. Elliot Embleton, also injured. He started in the number 10 role. Evans and Embleton have contributed for Sunderland this season, and probably would have continued to do so without the injury. Lyndon Gooch, another player who's contributed for Sunderland, started in the attack that day. You had Ross Stewart up front and Leon Diaku, who's just got out on loan, but did show some glimpses of quality in League One. So the sort of basis of that team was already there. Then you look at the bench: Jack Clark, Patrick Roberts, Trey Hume, Anthony Patterson, Tom Flanagan, Aidan O'Brien. So, Roberts and Clark were sort of new through the door, but it's scary to think that team actually lost 6-0 to Bolton. I'm not really sure what I really like Lee Johnson as a bloke and and I know he's just beaten Aberdeen 6-0 with Hibs, which is bizarre, but I almost feel he'd be better suited as a Christian Speakman type player or an analyst. I don't know if he's like, it's probably sound very harsh, but I don't know if his best role is a manager, to be honest. I know I'm digressing a bit, but I feel like he's better suited to different aspects. But anyway, I digress. Yes, Sunderland have come very, very far since that dark day. You have to credit Alex Neil because he got Sunderland over the line. Obviously, the way he left the job was disappointing, but with the Gelhardt thing to fend off the interest from Wigan, I think is big. I think that is quite a coup, actually. Not necessarily because of where Wigan are, but we all saw the reports that were suggesting that Gelhardt back to Wigan was done. They say there's no smoke.
Bus.
Yeah, they say there's no smoke without fire, though. So what I would suggest was those reports wouldn't have been surfacing had people not believed it was going to happen, to be brutally honest. So there's obviously been a bit of a U-turn somewhere along the line. Michael alluded to it. It could have been driven by Leeds United. But it's clear that Gelhardt agrees with that as well in his signing on interview. And I think if he really wanted to have signed for Wigan, he probably could have dug his heels in, and he probably could have got that move if he'd have really wanted. I think he's been persuaded that Sunderland's the best place for him. Wigan are a disaster at the moment. They've just sacked Kolo Toure, who hadn't won in 9. They look surefire things to go down back to League One. So to get him is a coup, as Michael mentioned. He scored a dramatic 2-1 winner at Ellen Road against Norwich City to sort of keep Leeds up, really. He contributed a lot towards the back end of last season. He's been in and out this season. He got 2 goals for Leeds last season in 20 appearances. England Youth International, great pedigree. If you watch him play, it's almost, and it's the easy comparison to make, because I think he's a Scouser as well. But the Wayne Rooney comparison, that both short, stocky lads, and they like to get on the ball and go past players, but they can also finish. I think his ceiling is extremely high. And obviously the Ross Stewart injury means it's good that we've got him in, really, but obviously that presents its own problems now.
Yeah. Obviously, all the players mentioned will be eligible to play against Millwall on Saturday. Obviously, Gelhardt's cup tied, so he couldn't have played against Fulham and obviously won't be able to play in the replay. But we touched on the Stewart injury a little bit during that reaction podcast, Michael. So I'll come back to you again, James, on that one. This is probably going to be the hardest few days the recruitment team have had, because you look at the situation at the club when obviously Ross Stewart got injured initially, obviously against Middlesbrough, and then Ellis Sims got injured. We had no strikers. We are very close to finding ourselves in a very similar position again, and I'm sure with the board, the management staff, and obviously the fans as well, don't want to see that happen again.
Yeah, it's a disastrous situation, because a fit and firing Ross Stewart is a player that can have you in a playoff position, especially when you've got Amad Diallo playing behind him and Patrick Roberts and Jack Clark. It's a huge blow. Ross Stewart, in terms of his goal scoring stats, is right up there with everybody else in the division, despite having played about 9 less games than everybody else. So it's clear to see what he brings to Sunderland. Gelhardt coming in is good. It's a positive. I still think Sunderland needed another striker, even if Ross Stewart was fit. So that probably means they'll need 2 now. Will they get 2 strikers? I'm not sure. The Ellis Sims situation at Everton is up in the air. Sean Dyche has just come in. Who knows what's going to happen there? It seems like it's a club in complete chaos, complete meltdown. Are they going to sanction any outgoings? Who knows? Although Anthony Gordon's just left, Michael was telling me before we came on air, to Newcastle for a big money move. Could that mean that Everton gets somebody in and then Sims is allowed to leave last minute? I understand that the player wants to come, but it's just all so up in the air because of the chaos at Goodison Park. So it's going to be an interesting end to the window. We've been linked with a few attackers. There's the lad from Nottingham Forest whose name you'll have to remind me of, Josh. Is it Konate?
Atif Konate, yeah.
That's the one, Konate. He's not a striker, I don't think. And to be honest, this striker question is something Speakman's come in for a bit of criticism for. I think some of it's justified. Some of it is over the top. There doesn't seem to be a lot of nuance around the debate. It's either he's the best thing since sliced bread or he's getting called names, which is unfortunate. I think, to be clear, he's done a marvellous job recruiting some of these players for Sunderland. Amad, Roberts, Jack Clark, Ross Stewart, although he was more of a Lee Johnson signing.
I mean, if you look at the signings we've made since he come in, you couldn't name a bad one.
Yeah, there's only really, I think, was Defoe was under him, but there's not many people.
Frederick Alves, but other than that, but you're probably talking about out of every 8 signings, for example, every 10 signings, about 7 or 8 of them have been good ones.
And you can make an argument as well saying that Hoffman didn't quite work out, and nor has Leon Diaku, but they're quite small blemishes really on quite an impressive resume for me. The striker situation is frustrating, and I understand why it's frustrating for Sunderland fans. It's frustrating for me as well, because with more ammunition at points during the season, I think we could have been right up there in the playoff mix more than we already are. So I understand that frustration. I thought we needed another striker as well as Ellis Sims in the summer. We obviously had that bad run with injuries where we didn't have either of them. And then you get them both fit. Sims is then recalled. Then you've just got Stewart, who's performing well. He gets injured just after you've brought a sort of striker/attacker in. But the form of Amad Diallo sort of lessens the need for Sunderland to panic for me, because they've got those creative outlets. Yes, they're not out-and-out strikers, but they're performing so well at the moment that they can sort of mask not having, a main man up front if Gelhardt's going to play there by himself. So I can understand them not wanting to really rush into things and spend money on a bad transfer, because we've seen Sunderland do that plenty of times over the years. You can see clubs getting fleeced left, right, and centre for players because there's a need for them, and they're overspending, especially in January. You can get your eyes taken out. So I'm quite happy to see how it develops and judge them at the end of the window. Ultimately, I know we're recording this podcast on the 29th, so there's 2 days left of the window. It's probably a good one to revisit at the end. As I say, Gelhardt's extremely positive. Will Sims come back? I don't know. There was another couple of names as well that seem to have gone quiet or signed contract or moved elsewhere. Yeah. And you don't know what these attackers coming in are going to be like. Lahaj could be, he could be converted into a striker. We don't know. Konate, what's he going to bring? I understand he's more of an attacking midfielder, but players sort of move around positions all of the times, especially young players. So whilst it is frustrating, yes, I do have faith in the recruitment team to sort of get it done. Stuart Harvey's role in that will be crucial. If I was a betting man, I think Ellis Sims will return very last minute, to be honest. Very, very, very last minute. I think that could be one that goes right to the wire. It obviously stands Sunderland in good stead that he can only play for Sunderland or Everton. It's best for his development if he comes back to Sunderland. But as I mentioned earlier, it's just complete chaos at Everton at the moment.
Just to quickly add on Ellis Sims as well, Ellis Sims also makes sense in a different reason that he doesn't have to settle in either. He already knows the squad, he knows the surroundings, knows the supporters, knows the environment. He'd be able to. I mean, you might have to get him a bit more fitness because I think he's barely played since he's gone back to Everton. So I think that's the only obstacle you'd have to really overcome. But otherwise, I think that just makes complete sense. I'd prefer it was a permanent, but if I'd take him on loan at this point. Just get him back in.
Yeah. Mind what I will say is I don't understand this argument that was sort of floating around when Ross Stewart was fit is who's gonna sign to be second and third choice, because I genuinely don't think it works like that, because you're one game away from being in the first team, and if you really back yourself, we saw with Broadhead in the summer, which I never understood that talk around him, because he went to a club with 6 or 7 strikers / attackers anyway. So I think if you back yourself, Sunderland will get the right player, but I think it's important Sunderland get the right player in terms of mentality as well. That's almost as important as talent at the moment, is mentality. We're bringing together a really nice bunch of lads, well-spoken, polite, that understand what the club's all about. There's no prima donnas in the squad, really. They're just all good people to have around, and I think that's important as well.
Yeah. And obviously James mentioned there, Michael, about, the frustration around the club and from fans when, we didn't sign the extra striker, and obviously circumstances happened and we ended up without either Stewart or Sims. Will there be a little bit more frustration if we don't sign another striker, given the fact that many fans, probably myself included, think that if we do recruit well, like I think we already have so far this January, there is absolutely no reason why we can't push for the playoffs?
Yeah, I would say that there would be frustration. I think a bit of criticism to an extent would be warranted if we didn't get another forward in. But I know it's not as easy as me just sitting here and saying, "Oh, go and get another striker." Like I said with James, I do have a hunch Ellis Sims will come back, because I think I got told off a Newcastle fan that the money that I know this is relevant, but I made a point before we come on air that the money that Everton are getting from Anthony Gordon, there's a suggestion. That's all it is. I don't know if it's true. There's a suggestion that that's up front. Now, for me, if that's the case, Everton will probably go out and get a striker, hopefully, and then that frees up Sims to come back. But as for your original point, there's going to be frustrations, because we were in that situation for, 2 months, or at least 5-6 weeks without a forward, without a fully recognised forward. And we did all right in that period. We got enough points to keep going. But obviously, if we find ourselves in that situation again, then it makes the challenge to go into the playoffs much more difficult. And don't get me wrong, if we don't finish in the playoffs, I don't think people should be demanding for anyone to be sacked or anything, or because there isn't the pressure to do it this season, but there is an opportunity there. I've heard so many people say it. There's a chance there to get into the top 6, and this is a perfect situation because there's less pressure. But go for it. If you finish there, great, and if you don't, so be it. We've had a better season than we originally thought we would. But yeah, I think if we can get at least one more striker, somehow I struggle to see us getting 2 strikers. I hope we do, but I don't see us getting 2. I think if we get at least, but we have to make sure that we get one, and even if that's Ellis Sims, then fine. We just need to give ourselves the best possible chance. And you got to remember, if we sign just one more striker, then we only play with one up front in the system that we play anyway. So I think, and obviously we've got players we can convert into forwards. But yeah, there will be frustration, and probably justifiably so. But I don't think that frustration, if that does come to pass, should overshadow a lot of the good that Speakman and Harvey in particular have managed to do, of which, as if you point out all the players they brought in I can't be bothered to remember all of them, to count them off, but there's a lot of them. But yeah, there will be frustration if we don't get another forward in at least.
I actually rated all of Speakman's incomings, and it's very difficult.
Shameless plug time.
Yeah, which you can find over at the Sunderland Echo website if anybody wants to navigate that. But I sat through and I rated every one of them, and even in the ones that have not worked out well, you can see the logic behind them. Like, you can see the logic in bringing Hoffman and Diaco in, Alves from West Ham as well. You can see the logic. 100% young players, something to prove, talented, just didn't work out for whatever reason. And there probably isn't a Sunderland fan alive that didn't want to re-sign Jermaine Defoe. And I know this is a slight contradiction in terms, but it's very easy as fans and journalists to look at a squad and go, right, we need that this window. And you look to have a complete squad all of the time. It doesn't always work like that. It takes time. We've seen with Sunderland, it takes time over windows to build squads. You go through different stages of recruitment in different positions. The caveat to that is, of course, that Sunderland have known about this problem for a good while now and not been able to solve it. But then again, I think they've also been extremely unlucky with injuries. You could argue that the Stewart one was coming because he played pretty much every game last season. But who could have called the injury to Sims and Stewart at the same time?
Yeah.
They have been unlucky. Should they have had another striker though? Yes, absolutely. But you've got to balance these things out, and you've got to give everybody a fair crack in the whip. I think Speakman has been excellent, as is Harvey, as is the scouting department. I think that's been revolutionised, to be honest. The way we're looking at players, the markets we're looking at players, we've never looked at in my lifetime, to be honest. And with the likes of Roberts and Clark, there's a bit of the Brian Clough about it. Brian Clough and Peter Taylor used to scout players who hadn't fit in other places or maybe had problems. I'm not suggesting that Clark and Roberts had problems, because Clough used to target alcoholics and gamblers and all sorts. But I'm not saying Clark and Roberts have those sorts of problems. But my point is that the careers had stalled a little bit. They needed a platform. They needed some love. They needed a manager who believes in them, and that's what Sunderland can offer at the moment. A progressive club with good facilities, playing in front of a fantastic fan base. And I think that's a huge factor at the moment.
It is because, sorry, Josh, but I think if you look at it, compare our recruitment now to what it was, say, the last time we were in the Championship. I know everyone tries to forget that season.
Darren Gibson and all of that sort of stuff.
Darren Gibson, Jason Steele, James Vaughan, Lee Camp, all those type of players that we used to go for. And like James said, if you just look at Jack Clark, Patrick Roberts, two examples he mentioned, what league were we in when we signed them? League One. Danny Bart, we signed in League One. Alex Pritchard, we signed in League One. I don't know. The fact that this recruitment team still gets a bit of flack, just for me, is everyone's allowed their own opinion, but for me, it's just totally baffling. I don't understand it. Criticism, fair enough if we don't get another forward, but come on, they've done well. I think every objective fan should admit that.
Yeah. Well, obviously, there's still rumours. There will be rumours for the next few days about players coming in, but one player that does seem to be not exactly confirmed, but apparently close to signing is Everton's 21-year-old defender, Joe Anderson, who I'm sure everyone is fond of that name, because why wouldn't you be? But quite frankly, I don't think too many people know too much about him. Obviously, he's young, he's English, he is highly rated at Everton, despite not really, I don't think he's played in the first team. He's trained with them a few times, but again, just shows the recruitment style that the likes of Speakman and Harvey are after, James, that we will target young players who maybe can't get into a Premier League side, that, with game time, with development, and there's probably no better club in the Championship at the moment to offer that than Sunderland.
Yeah, exactly. We're cherry picking players. We did it with Ekwar, who's got no chance of breaking into West Ham's team because they've got the likes of Declan Rice and whatnot. And the demands of the Premier League, it's very hard to take a long-term view with these players, and it's very difficult to blood them in. Sometimes the EFL is a far better ground to blood young players in. So that means they usually have to leave on loan, but then it's very hard to develop on loan consistently. You look at all of these players at Chelsea who've had 9 loan moves, and it's difficult. So the best option is sometimes a permanent move. But yeah, Joe Anderson, I don't know a great deal about. Everton have accepted an offer, I heard earlier today. Permission's been granted for the player to undergo a medical. So I'd expect that transfer on a permanent deal pretty soon, to be honest. It's all signed off at the Everton end, which is interesting actually, because it means they're still signing off on outgoings, even though it's chaos and Sean Dyche is only new through the door. What I would say on that is that Anderson doesn't look like he's anywhere near Everton's first team, whereas Sims is a potential striker, which are like gold dust, and he is obviously knocking on the door to a degree. So it's interesting anyway how that's working out over there.
So sorry, James, just quickly, is Anderson a permanent or a loan?
Permanent, I believe, or I've heard that both were discussed, but I think it's going to be a permanent deal. Or if it's not, just to cover my own arse here, probably a loan to the view of a permanent, but I expect it will be a permanent, to be honest. It doesn't make much sense really for Sunderland to sign a lone defender unless he's going to come eventually, given that it's an area where they're fairly well stocked. The only scenario in which I could see it being a loan move was if sort of Bailey Wright went and they were sort of desperate for that cover. But the profile of the player, you'd expect him to be a permanent. But I could be wrong on that. That's the interesting caveat as well. What happens to Bailey Wright if Anderson does come in? I personally think Bailey Wright should stay until the summer, because I think his experience is valued. You saw it against Middlesbrough coming towards the back end of the game. A bit of chaos. Who do you bring on to shore things up? Bailey Wright. Yes, he went for a wander at right back at one point, but other than that, he was very good. And we've seen it countless times after red cards, and when Sunderland need to hold on to a lead, Bailey Wright comes on, and great player to have around the place. I know fans get a bit annoyed when people say that, but it does matter.
I think that's one of the things that people don't want him to go for as well. Obviously, Corey Evans, who is obviously the last kind of player we'll touch on before we wrap it up. But if you lose someone like Bailey Wright, you're then left with, off the top of my head, you've got obviously Danny Barr and
Pritchard, who's injured. Gucci,
Pritchard, it's another very experienced player who's obviously I think he was captain at Bristol City. He spent so many years in the Championship in the EFL. Just having him even just around the club, even if he's not playing, will make a massive difference to so many young players.
Exactly, and I do understand what fans say, that you can't just keep a player because he's good around the place. Like, I remember we were having this argument with Glenn Louvens in League One. It's like you can't just employ a player because he's good around the place. But I actually think Bailey Wright can contribute and will contribute if he stays at Sunderland. The other interesting one is the Charlie Cresswell move. Sunderland have been linked with him for the past 3 windows. There's clearly long-standing interest. Similar with Ahmad and Manchester United, the deadline for him to be recalled has now passed, but he still could go back to Leeds if they were to agree something with Millwall, i.e. cash. If a permanent deal was to be agreed elsewhere, Millwall would obviously have to sign off on that. But Gary Rout was saying that he's Millwall's player. He doesn't want him to go anywhere, and he'll remain Millwall's player until he's told otherwise. So that one looks like it's gone a bit quiet. I'd expect actually Sunderland to probably revisit that, because he does seem to be one that the recruitment team likes. Possibly after Bailey Wright goes in the summer. But I think the thing with Bailey Wright as well is he probably wants to play, and he's coming off having played at a World Cup. He's 30 years old. He's been in and out of Sunderland's side. So whilst the Portsmouth move seems to be off the table at the moment for whatever reason, you just wonder if maybe he might push it through. That's not based on any sort of insider info, just sort of reading between the lines, that he might want to play. And if Anderson does come in, as we expect, he might be sat there thinking, where do I fit into all of this?
Yeah. And then last but not least, before we wrap it up, Michael, obviously Corey Evans is another player that is out for the season with injury. And if I'm not, I think it was at ACL he did, didn't he? And then miraculously actually played on during that game, which was quite incredible. But he's out for the season. He is, the senior player of that midfield. He is the one that, will sit back in between the lines and break up counter-attacks, break up the play. And obviously, when he first signed for the club, I think he was underappreciated by a lot of people, again, myself included. You've seen him in the Championship this season, being one of our most consistent players. And, in certain games, we've managed without him. But in other games, you're crying out for someone like him with the experience that he has. It is another area that Sunderland could do with another body in. And again, 2 days to get it, it's going to be a tight one.
It's going to make it very interesting, isn't it? I think Corey Evans, is a shame. We never seem to get luck with injuries, don't we? I know every club can literally say that, but I'm sorry. When, like James alluded to before, Sims and Stewart going out within 2 games of each other, and then you get you get Stewart out at least for the rest of this season. You would think Evans out for the rest of the season. Like, come on, we don't get much luck with injuries. But regardless, he's out. It is a blow. I do think Dan Neil recently has obviously stepped up to the plate of trying to be that sort of Corey Evans type of player that can control things from deep in the midfield. But yeah, if we can get another experienced midfielder in, then that would really help the lads out. And maybe I'm hoping the recruitment team sense that there's an opportunity to push for the playoffs, even if we don't end up finishing there. But yeah, it is a shame, but time will tell whether we replace Evans or not. Actually, correct me if I'm wrong, and James might know this, is Evans out of contract in the summer?
Oh, that is a good question, that one. I'm not entirely sure. Does he have 18 months left?
I'm sure he signed a 2-year deal.
I think
he signed a 2-year deal in 2021, but I might be wrong.
No, I think he's out of contract because it's him, Pritchard, and Bath, I think.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It says here, 15th of July 2021, he signed on a 2-year deal with an option of an additional year. Whether that is true
so
or
there's
not.
an option there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
whether that is the case.
Personally, I would trigger that for the reasons we spoke about with Wright and a few of the other players, just for the experience. I was prepared to give Corey Evans a chance when he came, but the structure of the team was all wrong for him under Lee Johnson, I thought. But when that sorted itself out and the players actually had clear roles and Alex Neil had them drilled, I thought what he brought to Sunderland was marvellous. And if you cast your minds back to earlier on in the season, when Sunderland had just been promoted and we were playing the likes of Coventry, and we weren't really sure how Sunderland were going to adapt to the Championship, I thought in those first few games, it was Evans and Pritchard were instrumental in Sunderland hanging on for some good results. I'm thinking of the Coventry game in particular, where Sunderland took the lead, but Coventry came back into it strongly, and Sunderland just looked knackered, getting up to speed with the Championship, the physical demands, the step up in quality. I thought Pritchard and Evans dragged Sunderland through that game, and a few others as well earlier on in the season. So again, fans will love this, but another good bloke to have around the place, and he's the club captain. So this is the thing with Stewart as well. I'd expect the way the club operates that they'll stand by these players when they're injured, like they did with Willis. Yeah. I know he wasn't on a playing contract, so to speak, but he was at the club using the facilities and studying coaching and whatnot. I'd expect them to stand by Evans, and I wouldn't actually expect it to alter the contract situation with Stewart. I think if you show Stewart loyalty now, then I think you get repaid when he's fit. I actually think it gives Sunderland a good name and helps create a further bond between player and club. Not dissimilar to what happened with Niall Quinn when he first started, because he had an ACL when he joined Sunderland after 9 games or something. And I think Sunderland had to stick by him because they'd given him a good contract. But he came back and cemented himself as a club legend. So you just never know with these things.
Yeah. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Obviously, still 2 days left of the window, so whether people come in between now and then is yet to be seen. Obviously, a few names to keep an eye on. Obviously, Joe Anderson, which could get announced at any time really between now and the end of the window. Atif Kanate on loan from Nottingham Forest, Ellis Sims, and probably a few other names that will pop up between now and Tuesday. But we will be back.
We should predict when Anderson gets announced, just for a laugh.
6 p.m.
Jetting tonight.
6 p.m. tonight.
Oh, I hope not. I'm just due to finish work. I reckon
2 p.m. tomorrow or 2 p.m. Monday.
I'm going to go the long game. I reckon 5 o'clock tomorrow, tea time.
Who's going to be the sign that gets announced 5 minutes after the deadline closes? Sims.
Sims, yeah, absolutely.
Sims, yeah.
Hopefully with Wee Philly at the Academy of Light.
Yeah. Got to do
yes,
that one
please.
day.
That was one of the funniest moments I've remembered.
That was absolutely tremendous. It'll go down in Sunderland folklore, that.
Well. Like I say, we'll be back to talk about the Millwall game, which is obviously on Saturday, and we'll be back to talk about that on Sunday. But until then, we will see you later.
That's all, folks.